DJ and PK, it's 97.5 The Zone. We're joined now by Matt McConnell, TV play-by-play broadcaster for the Utah Hockey Club. Matt, good morning.
Hi, DJ. How you guys doing?
We are doing well. I'll bet you're doing better now that you have a gig for this year nailed down. I would assume this summer has been a little nerve-wracking for you. A team moving impacts a lot of people, and you were on the list.
Yeah, it sure does. My wife and I, we had a great May and June. We went over to Europe for a couple of weeks and, just kind of decompressed a little bit, and it was wonderful. And then got back to it, and now here I am in Salt Lake and ready to go. I can't tell you how excited I am.
Did you also, in addition to your hockey broadcasting work, did you work at a university as a faculty member?
I did. I was. They call them faculty associates. It was at Arizona State.
Yeah, we already knew that. Matt, everyone listening to this show except you knew that. He's just walking you into the gravy train.
What's that broadcast school called?
He's a Sun Devil, and it's all we ever hear.
So wait a second. I'm on the air for 30 seconds, and you're already giving it to me? What's going on?
No, I'm giving it to PK. You're just catching friendly. You're catching strays.
What was the name of that school that you worked for? The individual school, not the
Walter Cronkite School of Broadcasting.
Quiet.
We've done this dance. Jeez Louise.
Oh, geez, I'm so sorry.
I agree. You should be. Now I'm giving it to you.
Matt, I'm a proud graduate of that institution.
I couldn't tell. And by the way, that was a great setup. I'm pulling the hook out of my mouth right now. So.
Started this illustrious, underwhelming career at the Casa Grande Dispatch in Casa Grande, Arizona.
Fantastic! That's awesome.
Sure it is.
And a couple years ago, my sister lives in Maricopa now, and so I had to cover Utah, Arizona. And from Maricopa, you don't even have to get on the freeway. You can just go down through Casa Grande and catch it down there. And so my wife was with me, and we go through Casa Grande. It's a Saturday morning, and I go by the old Casa Grande Dispatch. She goes, "Let's see if it's open." And I go in, and it was. And it's a family-owned. The Kramers are the name of the people who own it. And the daughter, this was, might be close to 40 years ago by now. She was there, older, and then the guy who hired me, Donovan Kramer Jr., was sitting in his office just like he was in the 80s. And the newsroom hadn't changed a bit. It was a total warped time machine. So
you're in there and you're saying, "Hey, I think you owe me $75 from 1989."
Yes.
Is that what?
Matt, you are brilliant. You totally catch on to this. It was $75 and 23 cents, if you must know, down to the penny.
And Donovan Kramer Jr. is in his 70s
You should settle for about $200 now, right?
He remembered me, too. And I was there for 1 year and then went to Mesa and then over to Los Angeles. And here we are in Salt Lake City. And we welcome you here. And you already sound super excited. Tell us about the team. As far as we've been told, this is an up-and-coming team. And I'm sure you could provide us with information.
Certainly is up and coming, and it's funny because a few years ago when they brought in Bill Armstrong down there in Arizona, his mandate was to basically there weren't a lot of draft picks there wasn't a lot of prospects in the system, and so he systematically over the course of about 3-4 years turned it from that into some really good prospects that have made the National Hockey League that are contributing. And, oh, by the way, at one point last year, 20 picks in the first 3 rounds of the next 3 drafts. So now, fast forward to today, as the team gets ready to make their debut in the Delta Center here shortly, they've got a bevy of young talent. And I'm not talking just a couple. I've referred to it as a gaggle of good young players. And I'm talking about Logan Cooley. I'm talking about Dylan Gunther. I'm talking about Clayton Keller continuing to get better and better every day. So up front, they're going to score a lot of goals. They've got players who are going to bring you out of your seat. Logan Cooley scored a goal last year in Australia in the preseason that's still making all the highlight reels. It was an unbelievable individual effort. So they've got that up front. And they've got guys in the pipeline ready to, bust down that door here in a year or two. The big question going into the offseason, what's going to happen on the blue line, right? So they go into the offseason. They didn't have a single player under contract. They had some unrestricted free agents. They had some restricted free agents. And what does Bill do? On draft day, he turns around. He acquires Mikhail Sergachev, a defenseman who played with Victor Hedman in Tampa. He's big. He's got a little nasty streak to him. Unbelievably talented. A couple of cups on his resume. Brings him in. They bring in a big defenseman from New Jersey, John Marino, another Stanley Cup champion from Pittsburgh. And then they go get a veteran, this kid Ian Cole, who's not a kid anymore, but he's a guy that's a real good culture guy. He's a guy that's going to soak up minutes. So the question marks on the blue line now appear to be gone. So they should be better defensively, and they've got two very good goaltenders. Connor Ingram coming off a Masterton Trophy for perseverance is a great story. He was lights out good last year, and they've got a real good tender as well in Karel Vejmelka. These are names that you're going to learn over the time. But the big thing, the big picture here is they continue to get better and they continue to evolve, and they continue on that trek to be a Stanley Cup playoff team, but not just for a year or two, for a good long time.
It really seems like when you put the centers and the wingers over here, and then you put the defensemen over here, because with the centers and wingers, it seems like a lot of talent. We've heard him say, and I think it's a real clear-eyed approach from the general manager here. Hey, there's young guys. We've got 20-goal scorers, but who's going to turn into that 40 or 50-goal scorer? He's letting these young guys evolve. He's being really patient. And then over here, he decided, there's no hope. These defensemen aren't good enough, and there's just a lot of roster changes. Doesn't seem to be any of the patience that we're seeing with basically the guys who attack. And the guys who defend, a lot of new faces. And did it seem that clear-cut to you going into the offseason that it would go that way?
Well, I think what you do when you make that approach, I think what happens is it allows you to create flexibility, right? So now, some of the restricted guys, there's a guy by the name of Juuso Välimäki who's turned into a pretty nice defenseman. He was a guy that I believe was a restricted free agent, so they got him signed, and a few guys like that. They've got a Belarusian kid by the name of Vladislav Kolyachonok, who I think's got a real bright future. I think what it does is it gives you flexibility, right? And if the thing in hockey is the superstars are signing these 8-year deals, right? And a lot of times when you go and you sign a guy for 8 years, it may pay dividends for the first couple of years, but then that guy becomes a depreciating asset in a hurry because of his age, right? So I think Bill, I think the strategy here is, Bill and the organization, they're never afraid to pay players what they're worth. But I think when you get into long-term situations, it doesn't give you that flexibility. So they had a lot of that in this summer on the blue line. And they had, remember I told you about that draft capital, the 20 picks in the first 3 rounds of the next 3 years. They used some of that draft capital then to go get players that they think are going to help. And one thing with Bill Armstrong, he loves big players that can skate, and especially on his back end. John Marino's a big guy. Sergachev's a big guy. That's kind of the MO of this team, and I think they've done a really nice job with it so far.
You speak of these draft choices, and we relate it to the other sports that some of us may be more familiar with. In the NBA, you come in, maybe you play in the G League, or if you're good enough, you're on the team. Baseball, you go to the minors. The NFL, you go right there and you're on the team. How does it work with these draft choices in hockey when they make them in terms of what they need to do before they actually make an appearance with the team?
That's a great question. It's a little bit different in hockey. A first rounder in the NBA will probably, play right away or very close to it.
Right.
And, football, the same type of thing. If you're in the first, if you're a first round pick, you're making the team, and it's just a matter of when you really start contributing. So in hockey, when a player is drafted, they sign their what's called an entry level contract, right? So it's a 3-year deal, which everybody gets. The money varies. It goes up a little bit each year in terms of, what players get based on where they're drafted and things, so on and so forth. But let's say you draft a college kid or you draft a kid that goes back and plays junior. Well, then that contract continues to slide. So, if there's a player, the Coyote, or, oh boy, here we go.
Yeah.
If there's a player that Utah signs and then that player goes back to junior, then his contract doesn't really start until he decides to turn pro. And that's kind of how that works. There's other things I could, get a little technical, one-way contracts and two-way contracts. We can talk about that later on, but basically it's there, but it slides until the player actually, signs and starts playing. So it's a little bit different. There are certain nuances in the contracts. But yeah, and then, after you sign your entry level contract, you'll be a restricted free agent for a while, meaning the team has basically the right to sign you again. And then eventually it's unrestricted, where the player and the agent can shop their services to any team in the league. And there will be a quiz, by the way, in about 2 minutes.
Good.
I'm going to jump back. It's kind of now I'm a Michigan State guy, right? I don't do math well, okay? So for me to give you guys a quiz, that right there is a problem.
You had to slip up and said Coyotes, which we totally get because
I'll put 5 in the jar.
Been doing, yeah, right. You've been doing Coyote games since 2011, but your NHL resume, Ducks, Penguins on the radio, to the Thrashers, to the Wild, back to the Thrashers. So have you gone through this before? Were you ever doing a Minnesota game and drop Thrashers or Penguins in there?
I have no comment on that.
Yeah, nice.
I don't want to say anything. By the way, for a while I was on a first name basis with Allied Van Lines, so hopefully that's in my past.
How much do you think that the team will just benefit from stability, which is obviously what they didn't have at the end in Phoenix?
Massive. It'll be massive. And you know what? I saw that. So I came up here in April and I emceed the Meet the Team event, which was absolutely incredible. I know they had to close the doors 45 minutes before the event started because they ran out of seats, right? And I know Ryan Smith always talks about Utah and showing up, and man, I got a dose of it that day, and that is for sure. But I do think they're really going to, it's all new, right? So you want to have good, positive first impressions. The atmosphere inside Delta Center is going to be electric, not just opening night, but all season long. So I do think it's going to help them, and I think it's probably, maybe a fresh start for certain guys as well. That's going to be a really fun story to follow all season long. But, Delta Center, are you kidding me? Steep environment. Everybody's right on top of the ice. It's going to be fantastic from that point of view. But I do think there's legitimacy in that, in the whole starting a new team, a new city, and it'll be great.
We have seen in other sports that the elevation really accentuates the home field or home court advantage. When you've seen teams travel to play the Avalanche in Colorado, how big a factor is that? And so how big a factor do you think it'll be here?
I think it's a factor, but at the same time, these guys are world-class athletes, right? They're training. The training is almost. It seems like it's like a 10-month cycle now. It maybe 11 months when the off season starts. They take a couple of weeks off and then they get into their off-ice training. So I do think it's a little bit of a factor. When I was in Minnesota, our coach there was Jacques Lemaire, and whenever we'd play in Colorado, instead of the team practicing on getaway day in Minnesota, they would leave Minnesota early, fly to Denver, and then go straight to the arena and have a hard skate at Ball Arena, right? So, to kind of get acclimated. So there might be a little bit of that, but I honestly think the crowd factor. I think the loudness of the Delta Center and the environment is going to give them every bit as much of a lift as maybe the altitude would.
How realistic is the postseason this first year here in Salt Lake?
I think it's very realistic, and in hockey, hockey is a long season grind. So if they can stay healthy, I think they've got a really good opportunity. And the other thing too is you've got obviously great ownership with Ryan and Ashley Smith, right? So if they're sniffing around come March and come trade deadline, and they think they've got a shot, then it wouldn't surprise me at all if they go out and make a deal or two at the deadline. So I think playoffs obviously are the goal. And the thing is when you get in with the parity in hockey, you've got a really good opportunity to make some noise. It wasn't too long ago when the Los Angeles Kings came in as an 8 seed and they ran the table and won the Stanley Cup. So I really believe just all of that. We've talked about the Delta Center. We've talked about the ownership group. We've talked about the new scenery and all of that. I think it's all going to play positive roles in trying to get this team into the playoffs. But yeah, I definitely think it's within reach.
The one thing we haven't talked about is the goaltending. Where does that stand?
Well, Connor Ingram, I think going into the season, Connor Ingram's got to be your 1, and maybe Karel Vejmelka is your 1A. Connor Ingram was tied last year in the National Hockey League for the most shutouts. He had, I believe it was 6. He was tied with Tristan Jarry in Pittsburgh. So you got to think that his game is only going to be elevated based on the improvements they've made on the back end. So, I anticipate this team playing more up ice, which means, neutral offensive zone than they have been in the past, just because the defensive group's going to be better. And I think that can only help Connor and Karel moving forward. He's a great story. He was a guy that was kind of the third guy in Nashville. He won the Masterton Trophy this past June at the awards in Las Vegas for perseverance. He came in here. I remember his first game. He had been with the Predators in Europe, and they put him on waivers, and he got claimed, and then he came to Arizona, practiced with the team, I think, twice, and then the team had a long road trip back east, and they threw him in against the Montreal Canadiens, and certainly didn't go well for him. But from that standpoint to where he is today with all the shutouts, and there's a saying in hockey, the 10-bell save, right? Which is, just the greatest save ever. He had several 10-bell saves last year to keep him in games. So I think he's going to have a big season.
The field of journalism has taken a big-time hit, but wouldn't it be great if all journalists can graduate from the Walter Cronkite School?
Yeah, sure. You know what? That's the one drawback. I really enjoyed working with the kids, and I'm not going to be able to do that role anymore. But you should be a proud Sun Devil, because they've got a great program there in downtown, and the kids, man, the kids are really good. I look back to when I was going to school, guys. Like, we didn't have all those bells and whistles. We were like cutting tape, right, to cut and splice and all that. But yep. It is a great school. I'll give that to you. And, go Devils.
Matt, if you think he's laying it on thick now, you ought to be here.
Speaking from the heart.
You ought to be here. Once a week we have on the Real Salt Lake soccer coach, Pablo Mastriani, who turns out went to Thunderbird High like PK did a few years after PK. So if you think this is something, you ought to be here for Thunderbird High. And, hey, going down the street to the, Taco Bell? Jack in the Box. I can never remember, whatever. They went to the same Jack in the Box parking lot to flirt with the girls and get a burger with their teammates. And yeah.
Can you do me a favor? Just let me know when he's on vacation. I'll come on again.
Now you're my guy, Matt.
Well, Matt, obviously, if you went to Thunderbird and ASU, what's a vacation? The work ethic is so strong that it doesn't. That there'll be time for that down the road, but not now. We got a hockey team to cover.
That's the way it is. Oh, boy.
All right, Matt, we'll let you go before you get mired in any more of this nonsense. We appreciate your time. We look forward to seeing you when you Are you already relocated? You still got to do the move? How's that working?
No, I'm in my place right now. I'm in the living room, and I'm looking at a bunch of boxes and trash, and I don't know where the dumpsters are. I got to figure that out. So many things to look forward to. I've been walking around in the neighborhood. It's awesome. The people here are incredibly nice. I'm really looking forward to just checking out the area. I'm being told that I got to get to Mateo's for restaurant food. I guess that's unbelievable. I want to go to. There's another place, the Red Iguana. Like I want to soak myself into the culture here and the routine. And it's beautiful. My balcony overlooks the mountains, the Wasatch Mountains, and and I'm not just saying this. I'm not pandering at all here. Since I've gotten here, the people have been so incredibly kind, which is wonderful. Like it seems like a great place, and I really look forward to being part of the culture here.
Well, as long as you steer clear of me and PK, you'll probably be fine. Just avoid the two of us. That's probably it. It's the only thing you got to worry about. Matt, we appreciate the time. Good to have you in town. Thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you again.
You got it. Anytime, guys. Thanks for having me.
All right. Coming up next, Yogi Roth, formerly of the Pac-12 Network, now Big Ten Network analyst, and he's got YOption.com up and rolling. We'll talk to him about college football because he's calling the USC-Utah State game Saturday night. Yogi Roth, stay with us. He's coming up next. DJ PK, it's 97.5 The Zone. We are joined now by Yogi Roth. You used to know him as Yogi Roth of the Pac-12 Network. Now he's Yogi Roth of YOption.com and Big Ten Network analyst. And as part of his work with the Big Ten Network, he's calling the Utah State USC game this weekend. Yogi, good morning.
It is a beautiful morning in Southern California, and I'm sure it is where you guys are as well. I miss you. I miss that sound of that stadium, but I got a little taste of the state of Utah this weekend, right, in the game that you just referenced.
Exactly. The Aggies and the Trojans. And speaking to a couple of former Aggies here and about the game this weekend, all they did was shake their head and say, did you see that LSU game? It looks like SC might have fixed some of their problems. And then they had no further comment on the game.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, I think I'm not a big rankings guy early in the season, but if you did like a power rankings in the Big Ten, which is basically, almost half of football, with 18 teams in that league at the power level, I'd put SC at the top. Like Ohio State struggled in the first half. Penn State looked good against a West Virginia team on the road. Got to give them credit there. Michigan struggled offensively in the passing game. Like SC had the most complete game. It wasn't perfect. I mean, they're not perfect. They'll give up some stuff on Saturday night, but they are a dramatically improved team, a more physical team, a more connected team, and there's a bunch of reasons why that we'll talk about on Saturday night and happy to talk about here. But yeah, this isn't Pete Carroll's Trojans, but it wasn't last year's Pac-12 Trojans either that only won a handful of games.
Yeah, you talk about not being last year's SC team was a bitter disappointment, no question about that. And I got to admit, Yogi, when I turn on the game and I see LSU on the first possession go right down the field, I'm thinking, oh, here we go again. Now, obviously, they didn't even score any points. I think SC got a fourth down stop inside the 10 or somewhere. I can't remember specifically, but until that point, it looked like LSU was rolling. And then I expected Moss to be good. The thing that I took away was individually, as you talk about not being last year's team, at least in one game anyway, the defense looked a lot better. What's going on there?
Yeah, it's a great point. We're going to meet with Dan Lynn, the defensive coordinator, tomorrow morning. I'm going to ask him and Lincoln Riley about that drive because it felt similar to you. As the game was, as that drive went on, I kept imagining, like, what is going on in Mason Cobb, Eric Gentry, Jamil Muhammad, like the players that were there last year. What's going on in their head? Right? They got 6 new defensive starters that all came through the portal. But there's another 5 guys that were there last year, part of that defense that mightily struggled all year and gave up a ton of explosive plays and drives like what we saw in that opening drive. And I asked one of the players on Tuesday, I was at a practice, and I said, did you ever, what was the vibe like? I asked Kamari Ramsey, he's one of the new players there, the starting safety. And he goes, I don't know about the guys in the past, but the guys that were here, we just kept saying, hey, just keep believing in it. And I personally think that if they give up a touchdown there, the vibe on that sideline might be a version of God, I don't know if we are as special as we think we are. I don't know if we're as improved as we say we are. When they get that stop, I think you immediately go from hoping your defense was better to, at least as a player, you are. And that's a big difference. Coach Carroll taught me that 20 years ago. Like the great teams, that's the difference, hoping versus knowing. And I think that first drive had a huge part in the rest of that side of the ball's confidence all day. I probably wouldn't have made or broke the game dramatically, but I do think the psychological element was massive. It was a huge stop, and they kept doing it, right? And I think they adjusted. That first drive I was charting this morning, when they blitzed 4 out of their first, I think, 7 or 8 plays, and then they don't blitz a lot the majority of the game because they were getting beat. They just couldn't get home. They were, giving up, obviously, completions with a lot of cushion. And I think you saw Danton Lynn and that scheme evolve as the game evolved.
The funny thing is, I think that it was more about SC being big in big moments than it was about SC dominating and limiting the yardage and all that. But it didn't translate to points. And there were other times where you'd look at them and think, well, they're pretty athletic, they're pretty good. And then a crossing route, I will never forget Money Park seemingly running through the whole secondary and nobody putting a hand on him in the conference title game a couple years ago. And here, even though LSU piles up the yards, in the big moments, the SC defense delivered something it always seemed beyond their reach.
Yeah, well, I think, what you didn't see a lot of unforced errors, right? Calling a bunch of the SC games last year, and I know the play you're referencing with Money Parks, it felt like guys were sometimes out of position, right? Or they were going for a big hit versus, just a short tackle. And I think that's a big difference for this team. And they're going to get challenged again on Saturday night. I mean, Utah State will use every blade of grass at the Coliseum. Splits will be wide. They'll really challenge the eyes with the run game of SC's defenders. It'll be a different game. I'm not sure necessarily what will happen at quarterback yet for Utah State, but I think that'll be a challenge they have all year long. Like, I don't expect them to be a top, 10 defense in America. Like, they're not Michigan. They don't have those players, in my opinion, but they're going to be dramatically improved. I mean, they should be a top 30 defense. And if they are, with the weapons they have on offense, to your point, like, they're going to score. Miller, I mean, he's in the conversation among best quarterbacks in the country. I mean, you can't argue it anymore. Like, it felt like he was kind of part of the country felt he was a flash in the pan. And it's like people forget that he was also a 4-star recruit and a huge get for SC. Same class as Caleb Williams, same Elite 11 class as those two guys. So I think they're real. I don't think that they're necessarily Ohio State or Oregon right now roster-wise. But, God, they'll be competitive in every game, and this is a team that could compete for a playoff berth for sure.
This is a general question. We were talking about this. We watched Florida State and DJU, as they call him, and we, on his third school, and we saw him overthrow the kid in the end zone by, it seemed like it was 15 yards over his head. And you're involved in this. Why do you think there's as many kids who have a nice high school career, a star ranking, all that stuff, but yet they don't pan out at the college level?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a big reason why I wrote the book 5-Star QB. And when you look at that research, there's up to today, there's been 140 5-star quarterbacks. The ranking started in 1999. Only 20 have ever been drafted in the first round. Only 7 were the number 1 overall pick, and only 1 ever won a Super Bowl on his second team in year 13, and that was Matthew Stafford. I say all those numbers because the definition of a 5-star quarterback is you're going to come in and you are going to change the landscape of a program or a franchise. And the reality is it just doesn't always happen. That's just a fact. It doesn't mean that you're not a really good player. It doesn't mean you're not a great player in college, but very rarely do these quarterbacks like DJU meet other people's expectations. And they never ask for them. And that was a big part of the book, is just try to showcase a little empathy. Nothing bothers me more when I see all these memes of him on the internet. I'm like, well, everybody typing probably couldn't throw the ball, couldn't dream to overthrow a guy in the end zone, let alone make it accurate. So there's a part of that I think is a little frustrating. I also am a big believer that accuracy is something that really can't be altered. you look at the majority of quarterbacks, there's been one guy that I've ever seen that's really changed his mechanics and went from being an inaccurate quarterback to being extremely efficient, and he starts for the Buffalo Bills, right? And Josh Allen. Most guys struggle, right? Christian Hackenberg is an example. Wasn't a high completion percentage guy in high school. It's kind of struggled in that regard at a lot of places. There's a million of examples in that regard. And we saw Tyler Huntley, I guess, grow would be a nice example for you guys in your backyard. But most quarterbacks, that's hard to do. And for DJ in that program, I'd imagine there's so much pressing happening now. Like the expectation, the standard, what they did last year. And I think what we're seeing is kind of the truth around that team right now through 2 games. It's an okay team. I don't think they're a world beater. They're not one of the top 30 teams in America right now. I hope Mike Norvell gets back on track, but what we've seen in 2 games is that they're highly competitive, but when they have to execute, they just struggle there. I don't think it's all on him. You got to run the football. You got to help him out. You have to be complimentary. And I think he's a really good college player. We saw what he did last year at Oregon State under Jonathan Smith. But I think from the very beginning, the expectations on most quarterbacks, including him, are often ludicrous, just because the numbers bear out that it doesn't happen, what everybody thinks is going to happen.
Yogi Roth joining us, Big Ten Network and YOption.com. Tell us what you're doing with YOption.com. You're into the season now a little bit. You're probably getting a better feel for it. What can people find there?
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, we're loving it. When the Pac-12 kind of fell apart, I just kept going around to campuses, Utah included, and asked, how are you going to tell your players and your team's stories? Like, there's no Big 12 network, for instance. And everybody agreed with the concept of, we don't know. And I think there's a window here for us to kind of create something unique, because I didn't want to abandon all the relationships that I had created over my time in the Pac-12. I spent almost 20 years in this league, and I had an inkling I was going to go to the Big Ten, and I didn't want to just, say goodbye to, 8 of them. So, or 10, or, whatever. And I just started competing and started thinking about what could we do? And I said, all right, these schools need options. I need an option. I need a job. I love the concept of Y option, because it's one of the oldest West Coast offensive principles. And my name's Yogi. So I called up Jim Thornby, who you guys know, and I said, hey, do you want to start something unique? And he jumped at it, and away we've gone. And the whole goal is to have conversation in college football through the lens of the West Coast. So today, we've had a conversation with Brian Howell, who covers Colorado as well as anybody in the world, to talk about the Nebraska game. We're going to bring on, I think, Trent Bray and Jake Dickert next week in advance of their rivalry games. We'll get Cam Rising on. We'll get players and coaches from Utah on, just to kind of celebrate the game. And if a team pops in the Mountain West, we'll bring their coach on, things like that, just to kind of, I think, drive dialogue from this part of the country. Because I think the reality has been, for my career, you're often responding to narratives from another part of the country, and they've never been out here. Let's just look at Feinbaum in the South. He goes off on Lincoln Riley all summer long, it felt like. And I'm like, did that dude ever go to a practice? Can he name more than 5 players? I don't know. Maybe he goes all the time and I'm not aware of it. But the idea was the West Coast needs a lens. And I hope that I'm trusted by that fan base. And I wanted to create some agency and take control of my career a little bit and try to see if I can build something. And it's been awesome, man. I got to be honest. It's fun. It's a lot of work. A ton of passion, and I hope people enjoy it. If not, I'd love your feedback. And if so, let us know what you enjoyed, and we'll give you more of it.
I wish they would have made you commissioner of the Pac-12. Maybe we'd still have our conference, Yogi. But that didn't happen, and away we go. I will say, here locally, I've listened to several because they come to my email. So when I go to the gym, I just click them on. It's like a routine now. And the Jake Heaps one, and obviously he has a connection here in more ways than one. And that was just fascinating, listening to him talk about growing up, about going from Seattle to Portland to have a quarterback coach, about his parents' involvement. And, having known the story, we know the story, covering BYU at the time with the parents and all, and being able to read between the lines, or in this case, listen between the lines of what he was saying. I would advise all, and any fan, doesn't matter, but especially BYU fans, to listen. I actually listened to it twice just so I could make sure that I caught on what he was trying to say. I thought that particular one, that podcast you did with him should be played in high schools and parents and colleges and listen to what the young man is saying about what he went through, because I thought it was really educational and in some ways it was profound.
Yeah, thanks, man. I've known Jake since '09 when he was in high school and was the Elite 11 MVP, and I think you're right. He's his wisdom, his ability to reflect and then share. It's the reason why he's the head coach of Elite 11 now and impacting the game, through, his lens, but also the wisdom and the lens he's gleaned from so many others. So I'm fired up for him. And yeah, I think I've heard a version of that with a lot of our episodes, whether it was Pete Carroll or Khalil Tate talking about, NIL and he's going to have to get paid now. Like, how does that even work? And how did he deal with his own identity when, his career was booming, and then when he met, the adversity that he met, and so on and so forth. I mean, we sat down with Miller Moss and Dylan Gabriel, and those are two of my favorite conversations just because of the humanity they both showcased. And for Miller, staying at the school that he loved. And we're going to keep doing that. I just think that there's a home for thoughtful conversation in sport. I mean, we created a whole media company. It's called Best Coast Media. And our first offering is this year, and it's Y option. But the idea would be, like, in 3 years, what if we became a version of, there's a lot of these, whether that's Cowherd's Company or Barstool, you name it, but it's founded in thoughtful conversation versus, I think, oftentimes like screaming and yelling and things that aren't based in fact first, that they're only founded in opinions with not a lot of a foundation. And I'm going to try it. I don't know if it'll work, but it's been really fun so far, and we're kind of putting our heads down, and I hope to pick it up, and we're at a playoff game, and the Big 12 champion Utah Utes are playing the Big 10 champion Oregon Ducks, and we just have a heck of a Pac-12 party together, man.
I do think that the way the media has gone, that hot takes get clicks and they get viewers, they get listeners, and even the interview sessions have changed now. You don't get to have a conversation one-on-one. It's in a group. Somebody yells last question after 3, 5, or 8 minutes, depending on the school or the pro team. And you don't get the backstory. And that matters because moments don't happen in a bubble. There's stuff that leads up to them. And newspaper writers and magazine writers used to write those features and tell those stories. But how many players today even know what a newspaper or magazine is? So many of those have gone away, or if they still exist, they've been greatly diminished. So any chance you give to tell people a story, and I think the first people to hit on this is what ESPN's 30 for 30 are. The backstory that sets everything up. And the Knicks-Pacers rivalry, why did that turn into a thing with Reggie Miller and Spike Lee? We all know the moment, Spike standing up and Reggie the choke sign. But, that's so many people, and they did such a great story. My kid, our oldest kid, wasn't alive for that. He's a huge sports fan, and he doesn't sit still and watch long. Like a lot of kids of his generation, doesn't sit still and watch stuff. But we were 10 minutes in, he goes, Dad, this is so good, because it's that human element. And there's still a moment to second guess a play call, but there's also a chance to tell somebody stories. So I think the more you do that, the more you fill a void that's out there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, a huge part of what I do when I talk to teams in locker rooms, because I was just down in Tucson doing kind of a media training talk with the team with Brent Brennan's new squad, another Big 12 team that is coming to town in the next couple of weeks for you guys. And I reminded them the same thing I tell everybody, which is, number one, recruits are seen as athletes who wear helmets, so most people don't know what guys look like. 2, you're a ranking. And now, for better or for worse, I think probably for better, but you're seen as a transaction, which is great because you're getting paid. But I believe this, and I said this on Cowherd the other day. I said all of us have to compete to take the helmet off and humanize players. But I felt like I've hopefully always done that in games. But now, your point is so well spot on, and people need to hear that. Because there, I think, needs to be more access to players to a certain degree. Because, people aren't going to be paying for interviews. I think that was a trend early on in NIL. I don't think, the industry is built that way. And we need to make sure that we're telling their stories. I talked to Brian Howell about it on the podcast of Colorado. Players aren't really available there. And I get it because they want to control the narrative, and it's all going on their YouTube channel. And there's a system behind all that makes sense. But in the same vein, I only know 3 players on Colorado's team, and you know the three that I'm referencing because they're always the ones that are out there. I think there's something to be told or to be said about telling other people's stories. And I think the same thing across the country around media availability. Like just SC's game, I love what they've done at SC. I mean, there's probably 10 to 12 players available every week, and you're just unearthing different stories. And that's the general media. And when you're calling a game, you kind of get everybody. And Utah's always been great with us. That goes to the wayside, especially now when you look at rosters and so many new faces coming from so many different schools. You just got no shot, and you're just calling it. It's just number one. He's a linebacker transfer from whatever Lenore. Is a guy who's a story. He's got a family. He's got a backstory, and I think all of us. It's kind of on the schools to make sure that they're available, and on the players to know that that's how they get their stories told. This is free media. I tell them all the time. I said, hey, I have to pay for PR sometimes, and that's expensive. Like, you guys get it for free, so make sure you take advantage of it.
Yogi, we appreciate the time. We're late. We got to run, but great having you on. We look forward to talking to you again, and we'll listen to you on the call Saturday night.
Yeah, hey, good luck, Baylor. It's going to be a fun one this weekend. Cannot wait to tune in.
Yep, Baylor and Utah, 1:30. Utah State and USC on the Big Ten Network with Yogi at 9 o'clock Mountain Time. DJ and PK, your feedback next.
And it's all over almost here.
Don't go nowhere.
DJ and PK brought to you in part by Lumen Technology. Your life moves fast. Quantum Fiber Internet is faster. Move up to tomorrow's speed today. Go to quantumfiber.com. That's quantumfiber.com. Question of the morning. Why do so many 4- and 5-star high school quarterbacks flame out in college? Vaughn says it's because in college, the defensive coordinator is only trying to hide 1 to 2 defensive players instead of trying to hide 6 to 7 like in high school.
All right, Vaughn. Putting his hand in the dirt right there.
Allen, they peaked early, or they had the advantage of all the extra camps and coaching that Dad could provide. But eventually, better talent and natural skill catches up.
I wish I could say I peaked. I never did peak.
Never did peak. It's kind of flatlined your way through high school.
Life.
Let's graph my high school basketball career. It looks like a big old shrug of the shoulders when you think about it.
Welcome to my life.
Yeah, there you go. PC Darrell says because they peaked in high school. Everyone peaks at some point in their lives.
No, that's what I'm saying. I haven't peaked. I've never peaked. It's just been the same the whole way.
That's because you were a 1-star, not a 4-star.
I was a no-star. Are you kidding me?
It was 0.3 star.
I'm still striving to be a 1-star.
Because the highest rated recruits are almost always based on pure athleticism, Tyler says. Not actual stats or on-field performance. They often lack football IQ, pocket presence, ability to read a defense. A tall guy with a cannon doesn't make a good quarterback. Bang, there it is.
No, but you can make a good pitcher, though. Randy Johnson.
DJ and PK, we're making way for Jake and Ben. They're up next.